So I'm going to talk about 5 things, not one thing. Hungarian psychologists, strangers with candy, nuclear war with Russia, the United States Congress, and lunch dates. All 5 of these things, interestingly, they have one in common, and it is they demonstrate the immense power and potential of learning to say no. Seriously, they do. Unfortunately, however, we have yet to realize this. We have these misconceptions about the power and importance of saying no, and I'm sort of looking around to see if any of the friends I invited here are actually here, and I'm glad that at least they're taking my advice. But seriously, no, learning to say no will make us better people in 3 ways. A personal level, an interpersonal level, how we communicate with each other, and a societal level. And it's interesting, really, we're experiencing a crisis of yes. We say yes to jobs, internships, clubs, opportunities, club opportunities and internships. It really now goes on, and we think that we're Superman, Superwoman with just, I don't know, a little bit more Red Bull, Adderall, caffeine infusion, that we could write the functional equivalent of the Bible in one all-nighter. And for those of you that have tried this in recent days, you know that the end result at 8 a.m. the next morning looks nothing like the Bible, looks more like the classified ads of the Daily Trojan, and nobody is happy about that. And even worse than that, I think, is that society has reinforced this idea of the yes culture. So no one here has heard of a show called Say No to the Dress, right? Nobody has here ever seen a movie with Jim Carrey called The No Man. And now, this is my personal favorite. No one here has ever voted for a presidential candidate that ran under the slogan, nope. We can't, right? And it's quite sad, really. And I think this yes crisis is also reinforced by the idea we have this view that no is this really negative thing for teenage sex and strangers with candy and drugs. But no has actually remarkably positive implications. And it will help us on, as I said, a personal and interpersonal and a societal level. So for a Hungarian psychologist that did a study a few years ago, the importance of no was actually unexpectedly important. He reached out to 275 people that he deemed to be creative geniuses, right? Composers, photographers. And one response he got back came from a man named Gheorghe Ligeti, who is a violin concerto composer that died in '06. And it didn't even come from Ligeti, it came from Ligeti's secretary. It was really quite strange. This is Ligeti. His secretary wrote back to the Hungarian psychologist that he is creative and because of this totally overworked. In fact, the very reason why you want to study him is the reason why you can't study him, because of this creative potential and this violin concerto that he is writing in the fall. Unfortunately, Ligeti was not alone. This poor Hungarian psychologist, a third of the people he reached out to, declined to be interviewed for his study on the grounds that they did not have time. Another third of the people, rude, did not respond at all, probably because they didn't have time, but possibly also because they didn't have a secretary, unfortunately. It's really strange. The author who went on to write this whole experience up in a book noted that no guards time, which is the thread from which we weave all of our creations. But he was really only half right, because for Ligeti, who is already a violin concerto composer, he knows what he's doing. He knows how much time he has to do it, and he knows that, when it has to be done by. For all of us, we don't really know what we want to be and how much time we have to do it and when we're going to be able to do it. So what we do is we say yes to a million different things and impress as many different people as we can and create these Google calendars that look more like something that you finger painted in the 3rd grade than anything that is actually meaningful and that can be distilled into something important. And here's the problem with these Google calendars, is that they represent a failure on our part to discern what is important about our lives and to do it well. We do everything poorly, and none of those things do we do well. Here's where that gets actually interesting. Think about the friend that you all have. I know we all have them. There's the friend that is always in the library, locked in their room, at a meeting somewhere till some ungodly hour. They show up to your birthday party 15 minutes late, or for 15 minutes, or not at all. Nobody wants to be that person, right? So how do we not be that person? It starts with the ability to say no, really, fundamentally. It really represents the ability to be honest with yourself and discern what is important in your life. Now, I think a lot of people have this misconception that what we should do is a bunch of things now, and then when we leave college and get a job, we'll stop doing all of those things and only do one thing. It's interesting because they said the same thing about high schoolers. David Brooks is a columnist for the New York Times. He wrote his last column a few weeks ago in the form of a letter on the day that most people, seniors in high school, heard back from colleges. He said the thing that got you into college was you stuck your fingers in a bunch of pies in high school, and then you convinced the college admissions counselors that you were ready to only do one thing and focus on one thing, and so go forth and do that one thing. And it's so ironic to me because the very thing we convinced the admissions counselors we were going to do once we got here, we don't do it. I can't name a single person that only does one extracurricular activity at USC or most anywhere. So the solution is really, in simple terms, to start treating these things like strangers with candy. Treat every opportunity like a stranger with candy and you'll be remarkably better off. Not just from like a stress life-based perspective, but really a quality of life perspective, because I think you'll agree nobody wants to be that person that's always in the library. Now, for those of you that know me, you know that I have a remarkable sort of experience with lunch dates. It's sort of unfortunate. Lunch dates are interesting because, and by the way, if you don't know me and you like the speech and you're single and attractive, 775-560-1571. That's not my number, please don't call it. But really, it's an interesting microcosm. It offers, I think, an experiential window into like how we say no to each other and other people. So we say no in one of two ways. The first way we say no to something that someone else has invited us to do is a read receipt, which is this little blurb that is automatically generated and tells the other person that you have read their text message and are choosing not to respond to it. For our parents' generation, this is the functional equivalent of a device next to the doorbell that tells the person ringing it the owner is sitting on the couch, listening to the doorbell, and not coming to the door. It makes mind-numbingly little sense to me. But I guess that's the way it goes. Look, this read receipt culture, the worst thing about it, though, is that it has caused us not to be honest with ourselves and with other people. I propose the second approach, which I think you'll agree is slightly more direct. Now, this is sort of innocuous, but it at least demonstrates the importance of a direct response instead of the read receipt culture. And, you know, I think you all think that this is sort of a silly example, but it really has real-world ramifications. So the first reason it has a real-world ramification is that one day somebody is going to ask us to do something, whether they're a boss, a superior, or our significant others, to do something that we don't want to do or that we disagree with. And J. Paul Getty, who's the billionaire Los Angeles oil tycoon that founded the museum not far from here, always said that he would never hire someone that didn't indicate a willingness to disagree with a superior. That was so important to him. And I think the reason it was important is because it represented to him someone that was willing to be honest and that wasn't going to be a yes man, which I'll talk about later. But more importantly, instead of being asked to be something or do something that we don't agree with, we will be asked to do something that we have no clue how to do. And it is in that moment that it will be important more than ever to be able to say no and be honest with ourselves, because the process of learning is only moved forward when you admit your own limitations. And it's sort of silly, but I think it's true. If we don't start learning to say no to innocuous things like lunch dates now, how could we ever expect ourselves to do them in the future when it actually counts to say no? And for the skeptics of you out there, I would introduce you next to a man named Stanislav Petrov, a name who is unfortunately unfamiliar to most of you. But this man is the single most important reason why you are here listening to my speech and not dissolved in a radioactive pile of nuclear ash. Now, you can debate for yourself which one of those experiences you would rather have, but I think that it's really important that we talk about the good Mr. Petrov. So Mr. Petrov is sitting in Sepakov 15, a concrete Moscow military bunker, on September 23rd, 1983. It is the height of the Cold War. It is 3 weeks after a South Korean passenger plane was blown to smithereens by the Russians after it strayed into their airspace. They were so quick to respond that nobody on that plane, including several Americans, made it out alive. You might say tensions sort of high. So there's Mr. Petrov, minding his own business, minutes after midnight in Sepakov 15, when the switchboard in front of him lights up like a Christmas tree, and the alarm bells go off like the smoke alarm in Willie Nelson's tour bus. And he's sitting there, and he's frightened, and he notices that the switchboard tells him there are 3 intercontinental ballistic missiles flying from the United States directly towards Moscow. Not a good time. A protocol called for Mr. Petrov to immediately alert the supervisors, who would then initiate an immediate, proportionate response and nuclear ash. But what he attributed later to like this funny feeling in his stomach, I really think was the ability of him to be honest and to sort of like say no to his instincts and to the protocol. He checks the ground radar, notices nothing funny, remembers years ago when the system glitched in exactly the same way, and calls his supervisors and says, A, this is a false alarm, and B, please don't blow the world to smithereens. And, well, obviously they didn't, because we're still here. But what he illustrates is the importance of being able to say no and the importance of being able to, you know, avoid these sorts of large-scale conflicts. So far, we've covered two things. The need to treat lunch dates like they are incoming ballistic missiles from the Soviet Union, and the need to treat opportunities like strangers with candy. The last one we're going to cover is the vast importance of creating a more productive and deliberative society through the ability to say no, right? So Doris Kearns Goodwin is a presidential historian that wrote this book about Lincoln. It was called Team of Rivals, and it was about his cabinet of advisors. What she wrote about this team of rivals was that these were people that Lincoln picked to advise him that could literally not stand to be in the same room with one another. These people, three of the people in his cabinet, in fact, all ran against him in the election of 1860 for president, and then he picked them to be his advisor. And Goodwin says that Lincoln did this because he knew that nobody liked a yes man. He knew that if he was going to create a cabinet of people that agreed with him, then it would just be a better use of his time to not create a cabinet at all. And similarly, moving forward like 100 years, Chris Matthews, who's an MSNBC host, wrote this book a couple of years ago about Republican President Ronald Reagan and my grandfather lookalike Tip O'Neill, who was a Democrat. Both of them were sort of forced to lead the country in the 80s in the same way that Obama and Boehner are today. The only difference is that those two got along. They fiercely disagreed, but sometimes at the end of the week they would sit down for scotch, cigars, and a discussion and hammer things out to compromise. Fast forward to the current Congress, which by most accounts, the last session is on pace to become the most unproductive since World War II. They are not only unproductive, they are less popular with Americans, and this is a documented study. They are less popular with Americans than Nickelback. They are less popular with Americans than head lice. And I apologize for this picture, but they are also less popular with Americans than colonoscopies. It is my belief that they are probably also, though they did not ask this question, less popular than listening to Nickelback while receiving a colonoscopy. They are unproductive. But it is so ironic to me that we are so quick to criticize this Congress for being unproductive when we are so rooted in an inability to be honest with ourselves about obligations and to be honest with other people about communicative respect. Because in some ways, the same problems that belie the current Congress are also the same problems that we experience and do on a daily basis. And in some ways, the way Congress communicates with us is in the same sort of strange, dishonest, and convoluted way that we communicate via read receipts. So I fundamentally believe that if we change the way that we interact with one another, our elected officials will mirror that way. And to me, that is one of the most important things that we can do. So look, I mean, saying no is really not that hard. If you just think of opportunities like strangers with candy and lunch dates like ballistic missiles, and it's also one of those things that, you know, once you do it, it's like sneaking out of your parents' house or asking mom for money or ditching class or not turning in homework, right? You do it once and it's like, oh my God, that was terrible. But seriously, once you do it like 5, 10, 20 times, it's really quite a liberating experience. So I'm serious when I say this. Next time somebody asks you to do something or to commit time to something, take a humongous pause. And in that moment of pause, you'll realize whether or not that's something that's important or something that is unimportant. And the sooner we start realizing this, the sooner we will create a better society. Now, somebody is also going to ask you, you know, you've become so negative. Why have you become so negative? Would you explain to me why you have become so negative? And this will undoubtedly take time, so you should just say no. I appreciate you all listening, and thank you for coming. It means a lot.